So next, we will hear about the European Green Deal and the EU Climate Pact. And I mean, really, who else is better qualified to discuss these topics than our next speaker? It is a tremendous honor to introduce to you Ms. Carmen Marqués Ruiz. Carmen is EU Climate Pact Ambassador and coordinator of the Spanish ambassadors of the EU Climate Pact. Carmen is a former EU official who joined the Commission already back in 1987 and later on worked for the European External Action Service. I understand that we will show a short video. Please, Alice, if you could start the video.
I want Europe to become the first climate neutral continent in the world by 2050.
Most importantly is the works which are going to be done.
Appropriate support for their new obligations. We need everyone, and no one will get left behind.
As we continue to battle the pandemic, we must also focus on our long-term challenges. This is why the Green Deal, as a growth strategy, remains our compass throughout the recovery.
We will reduce emissions by at least 55% by 2030. And today's agreement puts us on a clear path towards climate neutrality in 2050. It gives certainty to investors, to businesses, to public authorities, and to citizens. It future-proofs our union.
Yes, hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. As a European Climate Pact ambassador and former European civil servant, I would like to present to you the European Green Deal, which is a new European policy on ecological transition and the European Climate Pact. I will also try to explain how it affects EU companies and their supply chains. Although I have to say that I have listened very carefully to the previous speakers, and I am impressed by the depth of their knowledge. So my presentation will be a wider presentation, an overview, rather than a more detailed or technical presentation. Environmental, social, and governance issues, ESG, are becoming increasingly more important for European companies and citizens. With the European Green Deal, the EU is developing a new policy and regulatory framework which aims at mobilizing all the society, including companies, to achieve sustainability. The challenges are so huge that laissez-faire is not an option, and companies need to get involved, report, and contribute to a fair, sustainable, and inclusive society. But first, let me remind you two major recent international developments that have framed this new EU policy on sustainability: the UN 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. On 25 September 2015, the UN General Assembly adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and underlined the need to combine economic, environmental, and social concerns as a whole to achieve a sustainable development. Secondly, on the 12th of December 2015, the Paris Agreement was adopted under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The Paris Agreement seeks to strengthen the international response to climate change and to increase climate finance, and more precisely, it establishes as a global target to limit the increase of the global temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade And if this is not possible, at least below 2 degrees centigrade, although there is more and more concern that these targets are not going to be respected if we continue business as usual. So all these two major international developments were something very important to shape the European Green Deal. That is a new Europe's new agenda for sustainable growth, and is part of the EU strategy to implement the UN 2030 agenda and the Paris Agreement. Maybe we should go back to the previous slide, Alice, if you don't mind. The European Green Deal is also the EU response to the scientific community's warnings about climate change and the need to respect the planet's natural limits. It's very important to underline that the European Green Deal wants to transform an urgent challenge into a unique opportunity for the EU to reinvent itself and become more competitive in a sustainable way. Climate change and environmental degradation are an existential threat facing Europe and also the rest of the world, because it's a global challenge. And to meet this challenge, the European Green Deal aims to transform the EU into a modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy to ensure three things, and the three are very important. First, no net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Second, to ensure that economic growth is decoupled from the use of resources. And third, no people and places are left behind. Maybe we can go now to the next slide. So the main objective of the Green Deal to make Europe the world's first climate neutral continent is to make Europe the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050. And to achieve this objective, we must start acting now. This is why the European Green Deal also foresees a 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Although Vice President Timmermans at the COP27 announced that the EU was ready to go beyond this limit. I think he mentioned 57%. But let me also underline that the European Green Deal is not only about climate change, it's also, it covers other important objectives, such as the conservation of biodiversity, promotion of a circular economy, or zero pollution. Before the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine, the Green Deal was the #1 priority of the European Commission. The succession of crises we have experienced in recent times has only highlighted the need to emerge from these crises by staying the course of a sustainable recovery and a just ecological transition based on the use of renewable energies. And this is not only an ecological requirement, it's also an economic, social, and even geostrategic one. Let us not forget that the European Green Deal is also our lifeline out of the COVID-19 pandemic. 1/3 of the 1.8 trillion euros of investment in the next generation EU recovery plan and the 7-year EU budget will finance the European Green Deal. In the slide that you have under your eyes, you can see the different pillars of the European Green Deal. I would like to say that maybe, some years ago, environment was considered an area or, of specialization. Now the approach has changed, that we have to make sure that environmental concerns and fight against climate change permeate all the areas of human activity. And this is reflected in this diagram. So the European Green Deal is supposed to affect all these areas of activity. So first, it is supposed to achieve climate neutrality. Second, clean, reliable, and affordable energy. Then also an important part of the Green Deal concerns sustainable transport, preserving Europe's natural capital, to ensure a transition to a circular economy, a zero pollution Europe, a farm to fork effort, the transformation of agriculture and rural areas, and achieving a modernized and simplified common agriculture policy. And all these making sure that no one is left behind, what is called the just transition, and also this ecological transition will require an important amount of finance, both public and private. The European Green Deal is a huge endeavor of the present EU Commission, which affects many areas of activities, as you see, and it is work in progress. On 14th of July 2021, the EU Commission adopted the package Fit for 55, which includes a series of proposals designed to achieve this objective of reducing by 55% EU greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And there are many proposals that are being discussed and some of them approved, but nowadays we have a huge legislative package that is being discussed in Brussels. An important dimension of the European Green Deal is the key role of the private sector and private finance. Environmental concerns are not only a matter for public institutions or NGOs. Environmental, social, and governance issues must be taken into consideration by companies operating in the EU, both in their activities and in their supply chains. The recent political agreement on the EU law to fight global deforestation that was reached in December last year is a good example on how we address environmental concerns through the supply chains. Once adopted and applied, the new law will ensure that a set of key goods placed on the EU market will no longer contribute to deforestation and forest degradation in the EU and also elsewhere in the world. When the new rules enter into force, all relevant companies will have to conduct strict due diligence if they place in the EU markets or export from it palm, oil, cattle, soy, coffee, cocoa, timber, and rubber, as well as derived products. As a result of the European Green Deal, a range of ESG related regulatory measures have been introduced and announced. And this is a positive development, even if it can pose challenges for companies that must be compliant with the necessary regulations. And we have heard the excellent presentation on the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and the EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. I will not go in detail on these topics, but it is true that it is a challenge for companies now to respect all these new requirements. But on the other hand, it is necessary to make sure that private companies also respect these rules that are designed to protect our environment in the EU, but also in a more global, from a more global perspective. Let me finish saying that the EU is an international leader on climate change and environmental issues, and that we need to influence and convince other countries, in particular the main emitters of greenhouse gas emissions such as China and the US. Acting alone will not take us very far. And in fact, we realize that in the last initiatives, the EU is trying to go beyond its jurisdiction or its territory, because it realizes that through consumption, for example, we are contributing to the deforestation or to the that our companies in their activities need to respect EU legislation that protects the environment, and they might also feel in a not a level playing field. So we have a big challenge now that I think that we are trying to address in a creative way, but it's not going to be easy because it represents a more forceful approach towards the respect of environmental standards. Let me also mention some basic ideas about the European Climate Pact. This is an initiative that is part of the European Green Deal. And it is an EU-wide initiative launched in December 2020, so 1 year after the European Green Deal was launched. And it invites individuals, communities, and organizations to participate in the fight against climate change, in the ecological transition, and to build a greener Europe. In fact, Europe's climate and environmental measures are ambitious, involve profound change that requires dialogue and public support, and will only succeed if we design them with and for people. It's important to explain what the European Green Deal means for European citizens, and that's why the European Climate Pact was created. The scale of change and the stakes are so high that we need to mobilize everyone, young and old, men and women, Southern and Northern Europeans, rich and poor, intellectuals and ordinary people, urbanites and rural dwellers, banks, businesses and public administrations, universities, schools, municipalities, NGOs. The EU Climate Pact is an open initiative of people and organizations from all over Europe, united in a common cause to accelerate a just ecological transition. The pact is made up of 772 ambassadors from all over Europe and some also from outside Europe. We are 90 from Spain and there are 17 from Austria, for example. We are all volunteers from all corners of Europe, men and women of all ages and with very different professional backgrounds, journalists, politicians, lawyers, teachers, students, civil servants, business people, activists, sportsmen and women. Being an ambassador is a honorary title. We have been selected by the European Commission for our dedication and commitment to the fight against climate change, but we do not receive instructions or a salary from the Commission. We have a digital platform where we exchange experiences. We are very active and we just had our first EU-wide meeting of ambassadors in Brussels on the 1st of February to discuss our main achievements and challenges. We are active in social networks, we give lectures and talks in schools and universities. We write articles in the press, we give interviews, we organize specific activities such as planting trees, cleaning beaches, caring for biodiversity. We attend UN conferences, like, also, for example, the COP on climate change. In our activities, we must respect the values and principles of the pact. So Alice, if you could go ahead, I would like to show also the last slide. Thank you. So these are the following ones. First, science, responsibility, and commitment. We must work on the basis of scientific evidence and be proactive. Second, transparency, both with the public and with other ambassadors. Third, no greenwashing or practices that appear to be ecological but are not. Fourth, ambition and urgency. We must promote behavioral change in society as a whole quickly and effectively because we are running out of time. And finally, we must develop, the fourth one is the action tailored to the local context so that European climate policies make sense and are reflected in European cities and regions. And finally, diversity and inclusiveness. This is a pact and everyone can participate. We must mobilize as many citizens, foundations, NGOs, businesses, institutions, both public and private. The EU Climate Pact is an initiative that combines two fundamental ideas, a just ecological transition and participatory democracy. And it's also important to underline the role of young people in the fight against climate change and within the network of ambassadors. The ambassadors of the European Climate Pact are convinced that we are capable of changing our mindset and act now in order to change the current course that is leading us to an unprecedented ecological catastrophe that would threaten our future and that of our children. We need to innovate on energy, on transport, on finance, in the materials we use, in the way we produce and consume, so that we warm the atmosphere less, we pollute less, and we produce less waste. The private sector, the business world, has a very important role to play in bringing about this change in the economic model. European environmental policy is based on the principle that it is necessary to mobilize and support companies that are committed to a climate neutral and circular economy. We must reinvent ourselves because the future will be green or it will not be. And I invite you all to join this movement. We can all do our bit. We cannot waste that time or turn a blind eye. It would be unforgivable. Thank you very much. In the following slide, you will have my contact details and a web page that I have created with a team of young people who are also committed to this objective, and my email and accounts in the social media. Thank you very much.